Yeah, my name is Bryntse. I'm from Sweden. I flew in yesterday from Stockholm. And if you want to follow us on Twitter, you just go to Bryntum on Twitter. And today we're going to talk about testing. And of course, testing means many things. So we're going to look at how you can use Siesta to write a unit test. Of course, you want to automate those tests pretty quick. So you want to look at tools like Phantom JS. We're going to look at simple Hello World sample, of course. And also, when you do unit testing, you also want to do UI testing, because of course Sencha provides UI toolkits for us. So we have to have a nice UI testing capability. So we're going to look at that. And of course, once you have a nice big test suite, then you're not done yet. Then you want to automate it so you can sleep. You don't want to be able to sit, have to stay on a Friday late to just click around on your site. That should be done by machines. So that's why we're going to talk about automation in the end and continuous integration, and a little bit about cloud testing. So that's the agenda. And also, sort of how's the sound? Is it very bad or just bad? I'm assuming it's not going to be great. Better? Yeah. All right, so it's going to be less theory, and we're going to actually see real-world examples of a little bit of live coding. I'm not going to bore you to death, but just a little bit of how Siesta actually works instead of having a shiny PDF with 50 slides, which could be air. So I'm going to be sitting down here quite a bit. And before we start, we're going to have a little bit of a thought why we should test at all, because not too many places where you go that actually put testing high on their priority list. So that's what something we're going to talk about first. So first up, hand up if you're testing your JavaScript code base. That counts. That's good. So using Jasmine, Selenium, Siesta, that's good. That's very good. So, I mean, if you're not testing, then you're basically doing this guy, right? You put it in production, okay, it seems to work, click, click, all right, let's tell the customer, right? So this is one of my favorite internet memes. But if I summarize for myself, because I spend a lot of time thinking why I like testing so much, because it just makes me feel better coming to work on a Monday. And it makes me feel a lot more productive, because I have less overhead in my head. I don't have to worry as much. I don't have to think, does it actually work like this? Is this tested? There's just a whole lot of stuff that just goes out of my brain. I don't have to cache and think too hard about what's actually working. Did my coworkers check in something bad, or I don't know. And you get more confident. You type without thinking or looking things up. You just assume that it works because your test suite is telling you that it does. And of course, we use frameworks all the time. There's tons of tools out there, third-party libraries, and they contain bugs. That's just how it is. And your code will do too. That's the reason, the prime reason. My code does. It's just we have to be honest about that. So we need tests to help us find these bugs. Of course, when you want to refactor, especially if you're new at a company, you don't want to have some senior guy tell you, by the way, refactor this core JS code that's completely undocumented. And by the way, if you mess it up, people will call you and come to your home address. So I've been to places like that, and it's not so nice. You don't want to refactor something that's without confidence, without test coverage. It's not a good feeling, because then you have to go ask the guys, is this how it should be, or how do I test it? So refactoring is so much more fun when you have a solid test that locks the API down, and then you can fiddle around on the outside, and the test suite will tell you go or no go. And then, of course, there are many viewpoints here. We're mainly talking as developers here, but if you think about it from the customer side, they shouldn't have to report you a bug twice or 3 times. So that's happened to me. And I don't think that's completely uncommon. But if you fix a bug once, just wrap it with a test case, and then hopefully it shouldn't go back undetected. It can't escape that cage. So the client doesn't have to call you again to say, by the way, remember what I told you a month ago? Well, it's the same thing again. It's just not so fun. And yeah, like I said, testing is kind of a broad topic. It means a lot of things, and for most people it means different things. It depends on what your job title is. You could be a QA guy, a developer guy, junior, senior, application specialist. So it means a lot of things for different people. And the three main categories that I want to focus on are these. So unit tests, UI tests, and application tests. So unit tests is something that if you're working maybe with pure JavaScript, you'd use Jasmine. Probably all of you have heard about that, which is just pure code, doesn't really involve DOM. But UI tests, they're more about what's in the DOM. You click around, you type. And then we have application tests, where you just basically go to an index HTML page and then test it like a black box. So they're very, very different in their nature. They have different trade-offs, they have different return on investment, and we're going to look a little bit at that. But here's my little pyramid that I think sums up what I think you should devote your time to. So always start putting a solid base there with a lot of unit test coverage. Once those are done, you move on to UI tests, because you also need UI tests, of course, because your application is having a lot of UI code. And then once that's done, then if you still have bugs or you still have time or money in the budget, then you can devote some time to application testing. But unit tests, for me, will give the biggest return on investment, because you test like core models and stores, which are typically reused tens of times in the application, all over and over. So they should be very well covered. So a little bit about testing with Siesta. What does it actually mean? So Siesta itself, we wrote it. It's written in pure JavaScript. There's no installation, there's no DLL, no executable. So it runs in any browser. You can extend it, you can override it. The user interface is written in Ext JS 4, by the way. So it's completely just all JavaScript straight through. Can test any JavaScript, Node, jQuery, Angular, whatever. But we, of course, mainly use it for Sencha testing because it knows a lot about Sencha, stores, models, grids, views. So you just write your test straight down in JavaScript, and each test also runs sandboxed. And what I mean by that is that every test executes in an iframe. So you don't have to worry too much about setup, about teardown, cleaning up after yourself. So that means that every time you run a test, it's going to have a fresh context. It cannot pollute another test. So you're completely isolated, which is kind of nice. You don't have to think too much. And like I said, Siesta tests can be both about unit testing and UI testing. This is something we like for ourselves, because we built Siesta mainly to be a tool for our internal quality, and we needed a tool to do both, because most applications have some core logic which can be unit tested and some UI that has to have some more advanced asynchronous testing and UI testing capabilities. So basically two tools in one. And you can automate these tests using Selenium WebDriver, using Phantom.js, super easy, fast, reliable. Also, if you by accident introduce global variables, which happens sometimes, you just forget the var or you refactor some lines, we can help you with that too. And just quick look at the syntax. This should not be too scary, I hope. We use the nice BDD syntax. Describe some string telling the reader what to expect from this test, and then we just pass in a function. This can be seen a little bit like Ext onReady, because we have to wait for the iframe to be ready to process your test. And inside of the callback, we just do these nice it statements, where you can separate chunks of tests into groups. So you can run these groups in sequence, or you can, in isolation, you can say IIT to just include this piece and skip the rest, or you can say XIT to exclude a test, and this is just where you line up your expectations. So writing tests is not hard. It's just it's way harder to write XJS code. I mean, this is just pure JavaScript. So very simple to get started. So out of those three categories, I'm going to walk through them one by one: unit tests, UI tests, app tests. And of course, first things first. I'm going to do unit tests. So when we say unit tests, or when I say unit tests, I mean raw JavaScript. I mean just like logic, dealing with dates, math, business, finance, whatever. Anything that doesn't involve DOM. We're just doing pure programming. So those are the unit test category. And the nice things about these, that they run very fast, because they don't have to wait for DOM to be ready, you don't have to wait for Ext to be ready, you don't have to wait at all. So you can just like run super fast. So we actually use them for pre-commit hooks. So if you use Git, how many use Git here, by the way? SVN? That's about all. So both of those have great support for pre-commit hooks, which is something I like, because that catches errors very early. So if somebody messes up completely inside some core model or store class, it won't be able to commit into the repo. So it won't pollute the colleagues, which is extra nice if you're not in the same room where you can't like tap them on the shoulder or throw a rotten tomato at them. So it just becomes a much bigger turnaround time if you have a remote team. So tests help to just keep the repo clean. We shouldn't have syntax errors in there. We shouldn't have basic mistakes. So we use them for that. We run about 1,500 tests before every commit, and it takes maybe 7-8 seconds. Definitely worth it. And for unit tests, since they don't typically involve the DOM and global things, we can turn off sandboxing as well, which makes them run even faster. So we can basically skip the whole iframing part to just increase the time or increase the speed. And we've seen increases in speed of up to 5 to 15 times for a nice group of tests. So look into this sandbox disabling. It's in the latest release of Siesta. And like I said earlier, this should be your #1 priority. If you have a chunk of time to spend on testing or a number of your budget, I would invest it in TDD-driven unit testing. Just cover the most important model stores, all the business logic that's reused throughout your app. And of course, run often. You should have this automated inside your WebStorm or your Eclipse, so you can run your test with a single key command. So you don't have to switch to Chrome or to Firefox. It becomes a little bit too slow if you do it a lot. So run it before commit, run it daily, automated, nightly. And if possible, use TDD. Use the nice BDD syntax for readability. That's our recommendation. And a little bit about how you do TDD. So when you do test-driven development, you start by having a failed test. That's how it should always start. So you worry about the test first before you even think about what should be inside the API. So you can just stub out your API, then write the test, make sure you have it read, implement it, make it green, and then refactor, repeat. And then you just start over with the next API method and make sure you have a red test, green, refactor. That becomes a very nice cycle because you get to think about your API twice. So once as you write the test and then twice as you actually write the code. So that little extra cycle just makes the output more clean, I found. So I'm going to switch. First, I'm going to pray to the demo gods. All right. That I can actually do live coding. All right, so everybody hold hands. So this is how a simple test would look. Can you read in the back? All right, otherwise just shout. Yeah. So you see I use t.iit. It's because I only want to run this top section. There's another section below that we're going to run after. And I'm just creating my test subject, which is my model in this case. I mean, normally you wouldn't have this definition inside of your test. It would be in your application file, which would be included in the test. But for simplicity, I'm just creating the subject, the user model, right here in the test. So it's a user with a few fields, ID, name, salary, and we're going to add a method called getAnnualSalary. And to do that, to test it, I instantiate a user. This should be very basic stuff for anyone who's done Sencha. We just say new model, feed it some values, and then we do an expectation. So let's go to the UI and run this. This is Siesta, by the way. We have the suite on the left, and expect undefined to be this number 120. So that's a good start. It's red, it's big, we can't miss it. Now go back and do this extremely advanced coding. Turn this get monthly salary. how many months in a year? 11? 13? 12? 15, all right. So let's see if this gets the job done. Now we're green, which makes us feel happy and a little bit more confident, and we can just continue. We could add more methods here and just keep working in a quite rapid pace. One thing I want to point out here too is that you should not have code like this. You shouldn't test Sencha's code, because that's their job. So this to you should have little value, because all you're testing is that the model API works, and that's really none of your concern in one way. So I mean, if you really distrust this class for some reason, maybe yes, but normally this just becomes noise. So you should trust this line and not use it actually. So this should be bye-bye to you. And now we can of course continue. So let's say we have a user store. And that would look something like this. We extend the regular data store, add a model, point to the model, and maybe there's some feature in our app where we want to show the total mass of all employee salaries. How much expenses are we going to have as a company in a year? And this is not very complex either. We're just iterating, adding user get annual salary, returning the total. We should actually start by having this test read. So now we can disconnect this one, the IAT, and we can make this one the new. We should have a new failure. And we do. User store. What? Yeah, okay. I have to actually, I need this one actually. Oops. This should be out here. Oops. This is what live coding does. Yep, and now again we're back to red. Got undefined, need 360. So it's time to implement, and I'm going to cheat because I don't trust the demo gods. They've messed with me before. So we just iterate over the users. We instantiate a user store and feed it to some dummy data so we can test it, and the expectations. And hopefully now we're green. Celebration. We go home, close the laptop, relax. That's kind of why we picked the name Siesta, because this should just make us feel a bit more to take some vacation time instead of just worrying in the vacation like, oh, yeah. And of course, you see I'm doing a lot of Alt-Tab. I'm doing this a lot. So first of all, it's hurting my hand. Doesn't feel good. So this is where we want to use the power of Phantom JS. How many here have heard about Phantom JS, by the way? It's actually made by a former Sencha employee. So I recommend you check it out, phantomjs.org. And I've actually hooked it up to my studio, to my WebStorm. So I can just have a key command in here. You see things happening at the bottom. So in 18 milliseconds, I'm able to have a response, which is just way faster than going back to Chrome, clicking, waiting, blah, 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 blah. So this rapid thing where you can just type, now you can refactor. What if I do minus here? Then I can rerun again. This should be, of course, not so nice. Okay. So when you have a failure, you get the nice red, and you get a description. So there's really no need for this context switch to go to Chrome or Firefox. We can just stay inside of Eclipse, stay inside of Visual Studio, because all of these studios support external tools. So it's basically just firing it up here, but tying it to a key command so you don't have to use the mouse. So that makes you work very rapidly when it's time to do it. So yeah, Phantom is a great tool. Makes testing walk in the park. And just a quick look at how the harness works. So this is of course the testing, but then there's a way for you to, of course, to tell Siesta what should be part of this test. What's your test subject? So for our test, normally we just include Ext all, because our applications are built on Ext all. So we just include the all CSS, the all debug, so that we have a fully working Ext JS copy inside. And that is of course why this works at all, because somebody has to make sure that Ext window exists in the frame, right? And that's something you do using preload. And it's the same thing as you open an HTML page, put a script include. It's exactly the same thing. Under the hood, that's what we're doing. We're taking these, putting inside of the iframe, done. And then you just define your groups in a tree structure like this. So you can see this becomes a basic test group. You can filter and things like that. Run all, run failed. There's a bunch of settings here, code coverage. So a few features, and then you can specify the URL for the test file like this. We normally name the files .t.js to indicate that this is a test file rather than a class file. Or you can set it as an object with some extra config objects, config parameters. So that's unit testing. Not very tricky. And then the next stop in our journey, now we got 1 out of 3, is the UI. Also sometimes called functional testing, integration testing, depends on who you talk to. And as you saw, writing a unit test I was able to do very fast. It's easy, it's just code. For UI tests, it becomes a little bit more tricky. It takes a bit more time to write these tests because you have to instantiate your test subject, maybe wait for it to render. There's a lot of asynchronous behaviors. So it's not as easy anymore. And they also, since they are asynchronous, basically everything in a web app is asynchronous, right? We wait for the user to click, we wait for the Ajax to load, wait for the form to process to validate checks or whatever. So there's so many asynchronous flows, and that makes it a bit tricky too. So you can have race conditions. You might be tempted to say, wait for 1 second just to get a test working. But then that can be very, very fragile. If your test server is running under heavy load, it might be doing a lot of things in the background, and then that timer will not be enough. So this is a bit more tricky, but still doable. Also, to be able to deal with these UI tests, you have to be familiar with component query and CSS, because that's how we target things on the screen. So definitely study the Ext component query in the Sencha docs, and basic CSS queries, where you can use any CSS3 compatible syntax to target things in the DOM. And like I said, when we talk about UI tests, I divide them into 2 separate categories. So one I call UI unit tests. Basically, take this widget, put it in a sandbox, fiddle around with it, see what it does, see if it works. And then, of course, you can do that in a bigger context. You can take 2 of these, put together, and that's a new integration test, but still, it's not your app, it's just a part of your app. So it's a bit more the unit testing mindset, but applied to the UI level. So I kind of like that. We do a lot of that ourselves. And then the final one is, of course, test everything. Go to app/index.html and wait for the login box to show, but then you're running a lot of code. So you're on very, very high up. It's basically like on a map where you're zoomed out to the max and trying to find something in there. It's not so easy. If it breaks, debugging will take longer. So, quick UI unit test demo. Again, quick prayer. Okay, let's see if that works. So for UI tests, I create my test subject inline. So I just fire up a window, set some properties, put some nice fields, and a button. So we have something to play around with. So, and then there's a special command in Siesta, which is called chain. It's a asynchronous chain method where you can just put commands that are going to be executed asynchronously to the page. So this is basically our user simulation. So we can say click. This special double arrow means component query. By default, a target will be a CSS query. Because remember, Siesta is also for non-Sencha code. And then we type Bob, and then we tab to the next field, and then we type the uncrackable password, Bob's password. And then again, we click the login button. And then this is kind of the assertion in this case. We're waiting for the component query to be not found. And as you see, I'm just faking a server interaction here, just waiting for 3 seconds, and then I'm closing the window. So this is kind of the contract of this test. We're expecting the login window to disappear after we're logged in. But you would probably do it in a cleaner way in a real app. But let's see how this works. It's waiting, and success. And we can expand, And now you can see how long it waited. Waited 29.30, so 7 milliseconds for component query window. Oops. To return empty. So that's the test. It runs fast by default, but you can turn it off if you want to do a bit of a visual inspection yourself. You can run it in a slow-mo mode. So now this becomes boring after a while, but so I like the fast mode. But just for demonstration purposes, you can, if there's something strange visually appearing on the screen, you can run it in slow-mo mode. But let's switch it back on so we don't fall asleep. All right, so that's UI component test. And again, it's not very tricky stuff. The only thing that's unique here is that we're using this chain command. And this is all documented what you can do, but there's a lot of wait fors. Wait for this, wait for animations to complete, wait for component query, wait for CSS query, wait for event, wait for your application to fire a login event. So we have all this sugar available for you to use out of the box. And you specify these actions as objects, but you can also plug in a function here, where you can do, of course, anything. So this is called a function step. And here you can do like t_is_1_2, doubt it. We can run the test again, and we should have a failure. So you can switch between these. You can have some commands, and then you evaluate. You go back to command mode, you evaluate. So this is how you write UI tests in Siesta. It's all just these simple object definitions and functions to do your assertions, your expectations. So quite straightforward, and everything is asynchronous. So everything is callback driven. So the first parameter to a function is the continuation. So when you're ready to continue the chain, you just call this next, and it goes on to whatever you want to do here. Click some coordinate or something. So yeah, t.chain is the main command that you want to learn if you're doing UI testing or application testing. But this doesn't apply to to unit tests so much. This is more for asynchronous. Alrighty, I'll just quickly, if we get rid of this, I'll show another fun feature. So we also added a component inspector, which is great if you're new to Ext, which just lets you play around and see what things are actually. So you can see that this is a title component, this is a window component. You see the X type in the top left. So if you have a testing team that's maybe new to Ext, they don't know what it's doing, your QA, they have no idea what X type is, but here is a quick way for them to just figure out, okay, that's a toolbar, of course, we know that. This is a button X type. And we added also a way for this to go straight to the Sencha docs for this class. So kind of teach you more about what you can do with this class. So this is kind of, nice shortcut, because there's no reason why we shouldn't, because you want to get the full picture. Not X type is nice, but what does it actually mean? So you can go straight to documentation and learn about this class. But the internet is, not so fast. But it seems to work. So that's a component inspector. You can show only bugs. You can view the code in here. Hide and show DOM. So for DOM tests, you of course have this collapse because there is no DOM. You don't care about DOM. For unit tests, just pure code. So component inspector is fun. That's a recorder. I'll get back to that in a bit. And let's head on. So once you have this in place, you can do unit tests. You can do UI tests. And then the final piece, if there's time left in your budget or in your week, I would focus on application tests. Because we as developers, we typically care, at least for me, I care about the code I ship to my team. That's our little module. That should work. But piecing it together might be someone else's end concern. So that might be some QA guy or some manager who has to sign off each delivery. So to do that, of course, we need application tests. So different players or different people in your company will have different interests in these tests. And of course, a manager wants to know, can we ship this? Then it doesn't mean so much if this model works, this module. It has to work as a whole. So application tests cannot be ignored. But I think the more tests you have for the unit, the UI, the less the need for the actual application test, which is basically testing the glue. So for those, we want to use the recorder because we don't want to handwrite everything from scratch. That takes too much time, it's not fun. So this is the prime case to use a recorder when you're doing application tests. So it records everything from clicks to types to double click, drag, anything that the user will try to do in your application. And then you can export this code or these actions into the chain, a list of chain commands that I just showed you. So the exporter actually, the exporter in the recorder gives you a fully runnable test case. And this means that you can actually have a non-programmer give you a nice scaffolded test. Maybe the developer comes in, makes a few modifications because he knows about the components, what their properties are. But this, at the end of the day, you'll save a lot of time using the recorder, because typing these chains manually, figuring out all the asynchronous flows can be very tricky. And of course, we should try this out. So when we use a recorder, we use a little bit different syntax in the test definition, because now we're interested in not generating the application inside of the test, but rather pointing to a URL, which in this case is just some sample on my local host. So we call that host page URL, and we inject this test. The URL is the test that's going to be injected into the page. That's all we do to use this application test thing. And it looks like this. So this is just an HTML page with a sample of mine for our scheduler component. We can now hit the record button. I can double click here, maybe make it a little bit shorter, save, play. And that's it. So I've basically done a test which actually can prove that this is working without crashes. I can now export this easily. You see we have the offsets here. I'm not sure if this is readable, but it actually records down to the pixel where you clicked, which usually is not what you need. But in order to be able to replay the test exactly like you did it, you can keep them. If you don't, I would recommend getting rid of them, and then Siesta will click in the center, because maybe next time your button will have been changed by the designer. It's now 150 pixels instead of 100. So you want to stay robust, then you use the middle coordinate. So you just get rid of these. So we can now generate code. You see I get a nice t.chain, copy, back to the test, recorder. And that's it. That's how I do it. So you see this is what I get. So I'm starting by double click. And you see we have a new type of syntax here with this separator in the middle. That's called composite query, which is basically component query on the left, separator, CSS on the right. So meaning you can target any component, and then inside that component you can reach deep. So you can have very, very specific queries. And then combine that with the offset. You can click anywhere on the screen. You can say offset 100%, click on the right of this div. 100% plus 5 pixels, click a little bit outside the div, or this side of div. Bottom right. So you can reach any point on the screen using a very simple notation like this. And you see we're using this simple component query with the attribute matchers. You can query by any attributes. So you can invent your own test ID or item ID, whichever attribute you want to use, you can use. So super easy to use. And we can also modify the tests in the browser itself. So here we see exactly, you see the red being highlighted here. The component inspector is active, so trying to suggest targets for you. So we can actually change targets too. See what kind of effects that has. Now you see it animated a little bit, zoomed out. Now we're targeting the cell. That's not what we want, but we can just type here, just any CSS query, any component query, and Siesta will try to find it for you. So that's pretty nice to be able to have this knowledge about it. And you can add manual steps, of course. You can add, wait for animations, wait for AJAX request, wait for component query not found. So because everything is asynchronous, it becomes very hard, and that's why we've added a lot of wait fors. so that you don't have to figure these out yourself, because there's a lot of things. Like wait for content in the DOM, wait for login text to appear, wait for element to be wiped out, wait for element to get some content, wait for custom function which returns true or false, wait for page to load. So yeah, we use this of course internally heavily. That's why mainly they exist too. Wait for X type. So waiting is a big deal when it comes to UI testing. Yeah? Sorry? You can't record those because there's no such thing. There is actually one thing we do record. That's if you move your mouse to a place and just don't move it for 3 seconds, that becomes a wait for event. Wait for. So that's or we actually we record a mouse move. That's what we do. So if you want to move the mouse but don't click anywhere, we have actually made that into a special feature too, because otherwise you can't record, you can't tell that apart from, we don't know what you mean. But wait for will just be additional wait for manual here. Wait for event. So that's a recorder. Quite fun to use and a huge time saver. And of course it can be configured as well. It has an API you can work with. All right, back to slides. So now we've done 3 types of testing already. So application testing, UI testing, unit testing. Who over here have heard about monkey testing? Otherwise, why would I put a monkey on the screen? That makes no sense. Strange, right? So monkey testing is kind of one of my favorites when it comes to testing. And all it's doing is basically like you have a farm of monkeys. You don't even have to feed them bananas. They just work for free. So it's basically random UI testing. So it will click, drag, do all kinds of evil things to your UI that a normal person would not do. So it's basically like hiring a person to do this, which it's expensive and it takes time and it's going to break the computer. So 3 big reasons not to do it. And the cool thing about this, it will find unhandled exceptions for you. So we have had huge help of this. We have every example in our products covered by monkey test before each release. And I think every year we find 20 or 30 bugs for free, just because the monkeys just find some crazy thought pattern that we never even thought we supported. But it shouldn't crash nonetheless. You should be able to do whatever you want, right? So it's free testing help. So I don't see how you can say no to this, because it's just too awesome. And I'll show you how easy it is to do this. We can just take this test that I did earlier, UI component. So instead of this t.chain, which is of course something you wrote, we'd say t.monkey test. And I'm going to target the window component that I'm creating. So by default it's doing 10 vicious monkey. If you want crazy monkey, you do 100. It's going to take longer. If you want if you want to crash your server, but then we'll have to wait for probably till tomorrow for it to finish. So let's do 10. Or let's use the default. So this is all you do for free tests. I think that's pretty awesome. And this is what it looks like. So there's no way to predict what's going to do. It's going to click, drag. It might even it might actually close the window. Try the login button, but yeah. So that's monkey testing. So I find this actually extremely useful for typing like 10 characters. I get free test help, and that's all I need to know. If it's free, I'll take 2, right? So monkey testing, yeah, we use it for all our samples, and it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. All right. So we now know to do unit testing, UI testing, app testing, monkey testing, and we have a test suite, of course. We're happy. Now the only step left is the fun part, and that's to automate it so that we can just step outside, go to the bar, nobody sees us. So that's what we want to end up in, and that's where we need machines to help us. So continuous integration is a big deal. I'm going to talk a little bit about TeamCity, how to do code coverage, statistics. So internally we use TeamCity, as does Sencha. I think it's done by JetBrains, same guys who do WebStorm. a lot of the tooling. So great company behind it. Siesta integrates with it out of the box, also integrates with Jenkins or other CI tools. We run our test suites every 2 hours. That's our strategy. We run it in Chrome for speed, so we get rapid results continuously. And then every night we do everything because it takes more time to do it in IE in various browsers. So this is our strategy, you could say. And then inside of TeamCity, we have all the nice reports. We have statistics. You can see changelog. You can see history, like who did what, when did this build break. You can go back in time, so you see when this test started to fail. Okay, who did commits that day? Okay, interesting. He's not here. Okay, maybe he quit. But you have all this nice metadata about your tests, which is awesome. And again, we switch out to the real world. So we decided to put our TeamCity page online just to have like full transparency for our customers. So they can just go in here any time of day and check status for all our builds, nightly builds, whatever. So they can find things like this. They click on the code coverage on the right. This is also data generated from Siesta and then visualized using Ext JS. So this is just pure Ext JS, same as you use. On the right, it's a sharding package. On the left, tree, some filtering capabilities. And here, it's starting to be really fun because now you know what parts of your app are you actually testing. Because thinking that you're testing it is one thing, but having data to back it up, that is pretty cool. So we can go down on a class level. We can go to namespace level. And this is our root namespace is SEH, just like Ext. We can go to the column namespace. Here we see decent coverage, time access namespace, and just click around here. And of course, the things you worry about is not all green. If you see 100% test coverage, that means absolutely nothing. That's just air. But what you do care about is these guys, the red. So maybe I shouldn't show you this because this is bad sales for me. But I guess it's too late now. But this is actually the numbers that you care. Somebody should talk to whoever wrote these classes and maybe add a few more assertions, because we're down to 0% in some cases. Maybe you want to target some number in your organization, like 70%, 80%. Don't bet for 100, it's just a waste of time. But the value of code coverage is seeing where you lack tests, not where you have them. Because yeah, the code coverage again just means that some test executed a line of code. Doesn't mean that it works. Just means that something went through it. So, big fan of this tool. And like I said, this is online, so you can go to teamcity.bryntum.com/guest and see all the stats. You can see the changelog if the Wi-Fi admits it. We can go to the root page. You can see overview. These are all our products, projects. Here's everything Gantt. You can see the test suite for Siesta itself. How is it doing? We're using Siesta to test Siesta too, which kind of tells you a little bit about how the sandboxing works, because it's so easy to do. So there's no leak between instances. So that's a little bit about TeamCity. And then I guess the final piece, because we still have one huge thing left, because that's running it in many browsers. Because running it on your own machine, Chrome, Firefox, one version of IE, kind of easy. Doesn't take that much. But running it in many takes quite a bit of work, we've found. So for this, you have basically no option if you rewind a year or two, but to create your own virtual machine farm. And this is a mess. This is almost on the level of supporting IE6 in terms of, yeah, it's more pleasure to maybe break your ankle or something. This is how bad it is. Because you have to maintain them, they start upgrading their Windows versions, you have to fire them up, it takes time. Each of them is like 15, 20 gigabytes in size. So it's a mess. It's a real mess. I mean, yeah, think about it. Chrome, Safari, Firefox, IE7, yeah, that's already 7 or 8 VMs if you want IE12 or 2. And yeah, it takes a lot of time because they can break in subtle ways. There are timing issues. They're, yeah, not fun at all. So a few years ago, interesting things started to pop up on the radar. 2 companies, there are more, but these 2 are my favorite ones. Browser Stack and Sauce Labs. So Browser Stack is Indian, great company. Sauce Labs, downtown San Francisco, also awesome. And now you can just, on the command line, fire up any browser, any OS combo, and just use it as if it were Selenium WebDriver. It's backed by Selenium WebDriver, so you just use the same API, and Siesta integrates with both these. Just you can type, fire up XP, give me IE7. Fire up Windows 8, give me I11. And then you point it to our URL. They will set up a tunnel to you so that it's safe, and then it works. And you don't have to manage VMs, which is what you want to avoid at all cost. And we did a blog post about our integrations with both these tools. If you want to read the details and learn more, it's just like a command line thing. It's not very hard. And this, I think, is where my prayers to demo gods will not have any effect, because demo gods have no say of the Wi-Fi. And the only thing here is that this takes a little bit of time, because it has to go to wherever this site is, set up a tunnel, and that is and launch the VM on their end. So there's a bit of startup time. So you don't use this for rapid testing. This is for the nightly stuff. But that overhead is nothing compared to what you're facing if you take on the VM challenge. So I'll run it. Maybe somebody can sing a song. Is there anyone with a guitar? Or tell a joke? No one?
Questions?
Sorry?
Should we ask?
In a minute. There's just a few things left. But you see, this is just firing up a local tunnel to Browser Stack. I'm pointing it to the WebDriver bin binary, giving it a local host URL, which is the test suite that I'm pointing it to. It's the same that I'm using for demos. I'm using my own private key. Don't take screenshots, please. Oops. Oops. Yeah, and you see I'm specifying capability, browser equals Firefox, OS equals Windows, and then OS version, XP, 7, whatever. So yeah, this is going to take forever, but if I do this in the hotel lobby, it actually works. It's very, very slow here. But imagine having this in your Team City instead, and you don't have to think. This is all you have to type to run your test suite in any browser. So these companies are doing something amazing, I think, for testing. It's going to make a world of difference.
Including mobile devices?
Yes. So again, if I had Wi-Fi, I would show it to you. But yeah, just go to saucelabs.com. They show you everything. They have amazing stuff. I think it's one of the founders is the guy who was behind Selenium as well. So they really know what they're doing. But this Wi-Fi has no idea what it's doing. So let's not wait anymore. And let's go back and finalize. So I'll put these slides online. And I'm including these links to Siesta itself, to do the documentation. Team City, go there, play around, see if it's something for you. But I'm so happy we have this tool. But just pick any, Jenkins, Team City, whatever. Browser Stack is awesome. Sauce Labs, equally awesome. And I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A.
Can you show us an example of how to implement this testing code with Architect?
So basically, yeah, with Architect you would get basically a running application, right? So you would have to sort of take the classes given to you there and then import that into Siesta using these, because they're all, at the end of the day, they're also just JavaScript files, right? So you would put these files that you get from Architect here. Maybe you put Ext first, and then you would have something like your all debug version, because you want to test on your non-minified, because otherwise the error messages are really hard to read. So that's what you would do. That's what we do. We do exactly like this. I mean, it's just like putting links in a web page. And no, it won't know about the server. The only thing that it will wait for out of the box is that the component, the target, should exist. So it will do it. It's a little bit smart, but it won't. Yeah, this is the Sauce Labs page, by the way. It won't wait for that many things. I'll just show you a quick example. If we go back to the code here, model UI component. So if we add this, get rid of the monkeys again, they go back to the cage. And so if we do a set timeout here, I'll just show you the effects that we're getting, because we did it this way because there's just so many things that are asynchronous. In your code or in Ext code, doesn't matter. So if we wait 2 seconds before the window is even created, like in the early days of Siesta, this would crash because we would expect the target to be there. We would expect that the user know exactly what they're doing. But that becomes very hard, we find out. So now you're going to see it's going to wait. You see, it's just waiting for the it's waiting for the for this timer to exist. So waited to 2,000 milliseconds for target name to exist. And you see it's also waiting for animations, because maybe you're collapsing a panel and that's an Ext JS animation, and then you want to click on the collapsed header, so you have to have this waiting command built in. So mocking is actually, very few people know this, but mocking is actually built into Ext itself. I have a sample here, by the way. Maybe that's faster. Maybe not. yeah, okay. All right. Yeah. So mocking is actually built into Ext itself. We learned a year or two ago. There's a Simlet API. Who have heard about Simlets? Just what I thought. Yeah, but this was a huge thing when I found it, because this means you can mock away the entire Ajax thing, which is just more fast and just takes the server out of the picture, which is what you want. You want to have a test, worry about one thing. And I will show you what this test looks like. Examples, general mock. So you basically instantiate this. You can find it in the examples namespace, ext root examples UX. And then you have the sim manager class, which is a little bit secret, but it is in the docs. And then you register these packages, which should be the server response. You tie it to a URL, so this should be app data URL. So you see, when I try to fire off a request with a proxy pointing to the same URL, this is going to hijack the request, and there is no server action, which is extremely fast, of course, compared to going to the server. Server has to look up in the database. Database has to be in a known state. That's a mess. So definitely check the mocking in the docs. Maybe now it's loaded. Not so much, no. All right, crap. But it's very easy to work with, and I'll show you here. 501 examples build examples here UX Ajax. Here we go. So this is a screenshot I would recommend everybody to take. This is a huge deal for testing. But yeah, not many people know about it.